The late August sun beat down on Jake Morrison's back as he hauled hay bales into the barn of his family's farm in Millbrook, population 2,187. At 19, he'd perfected the art of daydreaming while doing his chores, letting his mind wander to anywhere but this dusty corner of Nebraska. His thoughts drifted to Amy, his girlfriend since junior year, and their plans to attend the same state college next fall. The familiar rhythm of work was broken by an unusual shimmer in his peripheral vision, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. Jake turned, wiping sweat from his brow, and nearly dropped the hay bale he was carrying. Standing at the barn entrance was the most striking woman he'd ever seen. Her presence seemed to bend the afternoon light around her, creating an ethereal glow that made his eyes strain to focus. Her platinum hair caught the sunlight like liquid mercury, falling in impossible waves past her shoulders. Her eyes were the blue of distant galaxies, somehow both ancient and new. She wore what looked like silk, but the fabric moved like living water, shifting through iridescent colors with each breath she took. The garment seemed to float around her rather than hang, defying gravity in subtle ways that made Jake's head spin. "Hello, Jake Morrison," she said, her voice carrying notes he'd never heard in human speech, like wind chimes made of crystal. "I've been watching you." Jake's mouth went dry. He should have been terrified. This stranger knew his name, had appeared from nowhere, and was clearly not of this world. Instead, he felt an inexplicable pull, like a tide drawing him toward her. What are you?" he managed to ask, setting down the hay bale before his trembling arms could drop it. She smiled, and the air itself seemed to brighten. "My name is Lyra. At least, that's the closest approximation your language can manage." She took a step forward, her movements liquid grace. "I come from a world that circles a star you can see from your front porch on clear nights." Jake found himself stepping closer, despite every rational thought screaming at him to run. The scent of her was intoxicating, like rainfall on another planet, like flowers that had never bloomed on Earth. "But why are you here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" Lyra's smile held secrets older than human civilization. "Because Jake Morrison," she said, reaching out to touch his cheek with fingers that felt like silk and electricity. "You have something I need." The late afternoon sun slanted through the barn doors, casting long shadows that seemed to dance around them. In that moment, Jake knew his life would never be the same. What he didn't know was whether that was a blessing or a curse. Over the next week, Lyra appeared to Jake at unexpected moments, always when he was alone, always vanishing before anyone else could see her. She materialized in the cornfield while he was checking irrigation lines, beside the creek where he went fishing, and once in his bedroom late at night, her form ghostly in the moonlight streaming through his window. Each encounter left him more enchanted and confused than the last. She would tell him fragments of stories about her world, a planet called Avalon, where the purple grass sang in the wind and the oceans glowed with bioluminescent life. Her descriptions painted pictures of a civilization so advanced it seemed like magic, yet she spoke of it with a strange melancholy. "Don't you miss it?" Jake asked one evening as they sat on the roof of the barn, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed more vivid since her arrival. "My world is dying," Lyra replied, her ethereal dress rippling with shades of amber and gold that matched the sky. "That's why I'm here. Why I chose you." She turned those impossibly blue eyes on him, and Jake felt his heart stutter. "What do you mean, chose me?" He was acutely aware of how close she was sitting, this strange electric feeling whenever their shoulders brushed. Lyra reached out and traced a finger along his jaw, sending shivers down his spine. "Your species is young, vibrant, full of potential. My people are ancient, refined, but fading. We need renewal." Her touch was like static electricity, making his skin tingle and his thoughts blur. Jake closed his eyes, trying to remember Amy, sweet, normal Amy who had been texting him all week, wondering why he seemed so distant lately. But Amy's face kept dissolving into stardust in his mind. "I shouldn't," he whispered, but didn't pull away when Lyra's fingers trailed down his neck. "Shouldn't what?" Her voice was hypnotic, layered with harmonics that made his pulse race. Question the universe's gifts? Explore beyond your small corner of existence? She leaned closer, her scent overwhelming, like lightning and wildflowers and something alien he couldn't name. Amy, he managed to say, but it sounded weak even to his own ears. Lyra's laugh was like silver bells. Your human attachments are touching, but temporary. I'm offering you eternity, Jake Morrison. A chance to be part of something cosmic. Her lips brushed his ear as she whispered, Don't you want to touch the stars? Jake turned to face her, and in that moment she kissed him. It was like being struck by lightning while floating in space, terrifying, beautiful, and impossible to resist. His hands tangled in her starlight hair, and he felt reality blur around the edges. When she finally pulled away, Jake was breathless and dizzy. The sun had set completely, and the first stars were appearing in the twilight sky. One of them, he realized with a start, might be her home. Tomorrow night, Lyra said, standing with impossible grace. Meet me in the North Field, where the wildflowers grow. I'll show you wonders your human mind has never imagined. Before he could respond, she stepped off the roof and dissolved into a shower of light particles that drifted away on the evening breeze. Jake sat alone in the growing darkness, his lips still tingling with alien electricity, knowing he should run far and fast from whatever this was. Instead, he found himself counting the hours until tomorrow night, while his phone buzzed in his pocket with another worried message from Amy. The North Field was alive with fireflies when Jake arrived, their gentle lights mimicking the stars above. He found Lyra waiting in a circle of wildflowers that hadn't been there that morning. Her dress tonight was darker, like the space between stars, with points of light that shifted and moved like a living galaxy. You came, she said, extending her hand. The fireflies seemed drawn to her, dancing around her form like tiny satellites. I couldn't stay away, Jake admitted. It was true, he'd spent the day in a fog, barely hearing Amy's concerned questions at lunch, hardly tasting the food at dinner. His whole world had narrowed to this moment, this field, this impossible woman. Lyra pulled him close, and the fabric of her dress felt like cool mist against his skin. Tonight, she whispered, I'll show you what it means to love someone from the stars. The air around them began to glow, and Jake felt his feet leave the ground. They were floating, suspended in a bubble of starlight several feet above the field. The fireflies swirled around them in complicated patterns, creating a private universe of light and shadow. This is impossible, Jake breathed, but he was laughing, dizzy with wonder and desire. Impossible is just a word humans use for things they haven't learned yet, Lyra said, drawing him into a kiss that tasted like stardust and dreams. What followed was both ethereal and intensely physical. Their bodies intertwined as they floated in the artificial starlight, the boundary between earth and sky, human and alien, blurring until Jake couldn't tell where he ended and Lyra began. The air hummed with strange harmonics, and patterns of light danced across their skin. Later, minutes or hours, Jake couldn't tell, they lay in the wildflowers that had somehow spread to cover the entire field. Lyra traced constellation patterns on his chest with a finger that left trails of phosphorescent light. It's done, she said softly, a note of triumph in her musical voice. What's done? Jake asked, still floating in a post-euphoric haze. Lyra placed a hand on her abdomen, which now held a faint, pulsing glow. The joining of our worlds. Your DNA and mine, creating something entirely new. A bridge between stars. Reality crashed back into Jake like a bucket of ice water. You're pregnant? But we only just, my people don't reproduce like humans do. Lyra explained, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact. One perfect moment is all we need, if the genetic match is right. And you, Jake Morrison, were very right indeed. Jake sat up, his head spinning. But I can't. I mean Amy and I have a life here. What am I supposed to tell people? Tell them nothing, Lyra said, rising to her feet in one fluid motion. This child will remain my secret, growing in a dimension slightly adjacent to your reality. But know this, somewhere among the stars, you will have a child who can walk between worlds. The magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. Will I ever see it? The baby? Lyra's smile was mysterious and a little sad. Perhaps. Time moves differently where I come from. Our child might be walking the streets of your town tomorrow, or a century from now. They might appear human or… She gestured to her own otherworldly beauty. Something more. Before Jake could process this, his phone buzzed. Amy's face appeared on the screen, along with a text. Can we talk? I'm worried about you. When he looked up, Lyra was gone, leaving only a patch of softly glowing flowers and the lingering scent of alien perfume. The fireflies had returned to their random patterns, and the stars above looked suddenly cold and vast. Jake stared at Amy's message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. How could he face her now? How could he face anyone, knowing what he'd just done, what he'd just helped create? The night wind carried a whisper that might have been Lyra's voice. The stars have plans for you, Jake Morrison. This is only the beginning. The next week passed in a blur of guilt and anticipation. Jake went through the motions of his daily life like an actor in a play, his mind constantly drifting to that night in the field. Amy noticed the change in him. Everyone did. You're a million miles away, Amy said over coffee at the local diner. She reached for his hand, but Jake pulled back, remembering how Lyra's touch had left traces of starlight on his skin. Is there someone else? The question hung in the air like a meteorite about to strike. Jake forced a laugh. Don't be ridiculous, he said, but his eyes drifted to the window, searching the sky. That evening, strange lights appeared over Millbrook. The local news called it an aurora, but Jake knew better. He found Lyra waiting in his room, her belly now visibly glowing through her gossamer dress. It grows strong, she said, placing his hand against the light. Jake felt a pulse of energy that made his fingers tingle. Our child will be magnificent. When? He asked. How long until? Time is fluid for us, Lyra replied. But soon. Very soon. You should prepare yourself for changes, Jake Morrison. The stars have marked you now. She vanished as his mother's footsteps approached the door, leaving Jake with more questions than answers, and a lingering sense that his ordinary life was about to shatter completely. Things began happening around Millbrook that no one could explain. Crops in the north field grew overnight, producing strange, luminescent vegetables. People reported seeing shooting stars that moved in impossible patterns. Jake's mother found perfectly symmetrical crop circles in their cornfield, and his father's ancient tractor started running without fuel. But the strangest changes were happening to Jake himself. He noticed he could sometimes see through walls, and occasionally objects would float toward him when he reached for them. Once, during an argument with Amy, all the lights in the diner exploded. I don't know you anymore, Amy said tearfully, glass shards glittering around them like fallen stars. That night, Lyra appeared in the barn, her belly now a brilliant sphere of light. The child affects this reality already, she explained. And you, as the father, are changing too. Your DNA is adapting. Will it stop? Jake asked, watching his hands shimmer with a faint blue glow. Nothing ever stops. Lyra smiled. It only transforms. She pressed something into his palm, a crystal that pulsed in sync with her belly's glow. Keep this close. You'll know when it's time. As she faded away, Jake heard police sirens in the distance. The town was starting to notice that something very strange was happening in Millbrook, Nebraska. Government vehicles started appearing in Millbrook. Men in dark suits interviewed farmers about the strange lights and unexplained phenomena. Jake watched from his window as they set up equipment in the fields, their instruments blinking with urgent red lights. The crystal Lyra had given him grew warmer each day. He kept it in his pocket, feeling it pulse like a second heartbeat. His own abilities were becoming harder to hide. At breakfast, the coffee pot floated to the table by itself, making his parents stare in shocked silence. Amy cornered him behind the school. I followed you last night, she said, her voice shaking. I saw you, with her. In the air. She's not human, is she? Before Jake could respond, the crystal in his pocket flared hot. The sky darkened suddenly, and a familiar shimmer appeared between them. No, Lyra's voice rang out as she materialized, her belly now blindingly bright. I'm not human. And soon neither will he be. Fully! Amy screamed, and in that moment, everything changed. The air crackled with energy as Amy stumbled backward, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Security alarms blared across town, and the government vehicle's sirens wailed to life. They're coming, Lyra said calmly, her ethereal form flickering like starlight. Jake, you must choose now. Your old life or… She extended her glowing hand. Don't, Amy pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Jake, please. Whatever she is, whatever this is, you're still human. You belong here. The crystal in his pocket burned like a supernova. Jake could feel his body changing, becoming less solid, more like Lyra's shifting form. In the distance, he heard helicopters approaching. The child comes, Lyra announced, her belly pulsing with impossible light. It will be born between worlds. You can witness its birth, help guide its destiny, or remain here and forget everything. Forget? Jake whispered, looking between Amy's tear-stained face and Lyra's cosmic radiance. A gift of mercy. Lyra nodded. For whichever world you don't choose. The helicopters were visible now, their searchlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Jake had seconds to decide. Jake looked at his hands, now translucent and sparking with stellar energy. The crystal's heat spread through his entire body, and he could feel himself existing in two places at once, here on Earth and somewhere impossibly distant. I'm sorry, he said to Amy, his voice echoing strangely. But before he could reach for Lyra's hand, Amy did something unexpected. Take me too, she demanded, stepping forward. If Jake goes, I want to understand why. I want to see. Lyra's ethereal features registered surprise, perhaps the first truly human expression Jake had seen on her face. The lights from the approaching helicopters created a strange halo around them all. That's not possible, Lyra began, but suddenly doubled over, her belly's glow intensifying. The child, it's reaching across dimensions. Reality fractured around them. Jake felt himself being pulled in three different directions, toward Lyra's cosmic realm, back to his earthly life, and into something entirely new. Amy screamed as she began to float, caught in the same interdimensional current. The crystal in Jake's pocket shattered, spraying points of light that hung in the air like frozen fireworks. Through the chaos, he saw government agents running toward them, their shapes distorting as if seen through warped glass. In that moment of dimensional flux, Jake saw a glimpse of his child, a being of light and stardust, human eyes and an alien face, reaching through time and space with impossible power. The world imploded into light. When Jake could see again, they were floating in a space between spaces, not Lyra's world or Earth, but a pocket of reality created by the child's emerging consciousness. Stars wheeled around them like a celestial carousel. Lyra's form had become pure energy, her body a constellation of living light. The child was emerging not as a baby, but as a cascade of possibilities, sometimes appearing human, sometimes alien, sometimes both or neither. Each version rippled through time and space. Amy floated nearby, her mundane clothes now sparkling with cosmic energy. Her face reflected wonder rather than fear. I see it now, she whispered. I see everything. The child belongs to all worlds. Lyra's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. And so it has chosen its own way. Not my plan, not Earth's limits, but something new. Government helicopters hung frozen in the sky below them, caught in a bubble of stopped time. Above, Jake could see Lyra's dying world, its purple grass singing one last song. And between them all, the child continued to birth itself into multiple realities. What have we done? Jake asked, watching reality reshape itself around his hybrid offspring. We've evolved, Amy and Lyra said in unison, their voices harmonizing across dimensions. Time resumed its normal flow, but nothing else would ever be normal again. The government agents found nothing in the field except a patch of glowing flowers and unexplainable radiation readings. Millbrook became famous for its alien encounter, then infamous, then forgotten, except for the strange occurrences that continued to pepper its history. Jake, Amy, and Lyra never appeared in town again, at least not in any form that could be definitively proven. But people told stories. They spoke of a young couple seen walking through fields at twilight, their feet never quite touching the ground, their laughter carrying harmonic overtones that made flowers bloom out of season. They whispered about a platinum-haired woman who appeared during meteor showers, watching the sky with ancient eyes. And they talked about the children, extraordinary children who appeared in Millbrook over the years. Children who could read minds or move objects with a thought. Children with eyes like distant galaxies and voices that carried traces of singing grass. They would stay for a while, then vanish, leaving behind tales of impossible things and dreams of distant stars. The North Field remained special. On certain nights, when the fireflies danced and the stars aligned just so, people reported seeing multiple realities layered over each other like transparent pages in a cosmic book. In these moments, some claimed they could catch glimpses of Jake, Amy, and Lyra, moving between the layers of existence, watching over their interdimensional progeny as they seeded the universe with stardust dreams. The high school yearbook kept Jake and Amy's senior photos, marked, departed, with no explanation. Next to them, someone had written a quote in shimmering ink that changed color when touched. "The stars don't only exist above us, they live within us, waiting to be born." And sometimes, on quiet nights, if you stand in the North Field and listen carefully, you can hear a baby's laugh echoing across dimensions, carrying the sound of both human joy and alien song, bridging worlds with each celestial giggle. But whether any of this is true, whether Jake made the right choice, whether Amy found what she was looking for, or whether Lyra's world was saved, those answers drift somewhere between the layers of reality, waiting for another young person to look up at the stars and dream of impossible loves. Thank you to those who listened. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like and comment on this video. I am interested in your opinion. See you all soon.